This is Good Morning Mumbai with Hrishi K.
I'm pleased to welcome into the studio as my guest of the day, Principal Economic Advisor to the Government of India and a man who's a man of many talents, well-known environmentalist and urban theorist, Sanjeev Sanyal. India in the Age of Ideas, select writings which spans, 2006 to 2018 is something I highly advocate that you get into your lives. It is on all on-ground as well as online stores. Hi, how are you? Good to see you.
Great to be here.
My first question to you, obviously, is the fact that there are such interesting thoughts in the urban dynamics section, in particular about the ideology of cities and town planning. You're a firm believer that Corbusier and the so-called colonial planners got it wrong. And explain why.
Well, one of the odd things about modern India is that if you go to any part of India, you'll go to a part that is an older part of the city and you'll see all kinds of architecture which is local. It's meant for the local culture, the local climate and so on. But if you then go to a modern part, and they all look the same across the country, there's some sort of a layout, straight roads, and there's these what I call CPWD architecture. Where did it come from? It basically came from the takeover of our urban thinking by Le Corbusier and that generation, not just him, which basically thought of cities as machines for living. And so they had this very mechanical view of a city, which sadly destroyed our entire urban thinking process. And unfortunately, people don't realize that the urban philosophy has an enormous influence on the way cities are built. Every city is really a reflection of an urban philosophy. And because we have ended up with this Corbusierian, Cartesian view of cities, we have ended up with this very rigidly planned cities, which cannot deal with the fact that cities are actually living organic beings. And so this has really damaged the way we have managed our cities since independence. I'm trying to bring back a much more organic way of thinking about cities.
And I love that you give live examples of Banaras or Varanasi, for example, where you turn around and say the traditional thinking is, let's decongest the main city, let's build these, deep suburbs and have pretty little houses in the deep suburbs. But you're saying that the city itself can be the hub of activity and continue to be the hub of activity.
In fact, you have to remember, Varanasi has survived since Harappan times. It's probably just as old as Harappa, and it's still around. So there must be something going for it. And indeed, all of us go to Europe. We walk around the medieval towns and the narrow lanes, and we all very enjoy it. Why can't we enjoy it in our own ancient cities? Varanasi is perfectly fine as a city. It has beautiful open public spaces called the Ghats. We have these great old architecture. It's mixed use, all kinds of activity going on there, from religious to cultural to commercial, all mixed up in multiple layers. This is exactly what a great city should be. The problem, in my view, therefore, is not a design problem. Varanasi is perfectly fine as a design. The problem is that we are not managing it properly. The problem is that the lanes are dirty. It's a municipal management problem. So the good news is, I think, in the last very recent years, we have begun to think about this in this way. You may have seen that the Ghats are finally getting a little bit of a cleanup. You're also seeing the area around the Kashi Vishwanath temple being cleared up, a little bit of all kinds of encroachments and being redone. So I think a new approach is being taken to thinking about these cities. And note, in all these cases, a large amount of it is basically pedestrianized. In the old way of thinking, we would have, even if we cleared up something, we were basically going to put in more straight roads for cars. Whereas what we are doing here is opening spaces up so that people can walk and actually engage with the city.
Wonderful. Just some mandatories. We're streaming audio online all over the nation. www.onecast.in, numeral 1cast.in. 94.3 on the FM band and your radio sets right here in Mumbai City. So if you have friends and family who are fans of Sanjeev Sanyal's writing and want to find out more about urban dynamics and economic equilibrium, which we're going to get into, please tell them and that they can listen to it in their city online. Only if you're not driving, statutory warning, you're in the backseat of a radio taxi, chauffeur-driven car, at home, at work. You want to stream some video, we are up on facebook.com/radio1.mum. Continuing my conversation with the co-chair of the G20 Framework Working Group. Now, Kolkata, for example, erstwhile Calcutta and Kolkata. You talk about reigniting its spirit, and there's also a very interesting chapter that goes building Bostons and not Kanpurs. So lead us through that.
Well, of course, Kolkata is the city of my birth and my childhood, so I'm very attached to it. But, I have to accept that Kolkata has gone into a major decline over the last half a century. Even after independence and partition and so on, till at least 1970, it was the intellectual commercial hub of India. Not many people realize that it's only in the 70s that Mumbai took over the role of being India's commercial hub. Many major companies used to have their headquarters in Kolkata. It's only in the 70s and 80s that they shifted here. So I'm arguing that if you want to get Kolkata going again, it's very important to reignite its many things, but certainly its intellectual spirit. Kolkata was home to some of the great thinkers of India before independence, whether it is Vidyasagar, Tagore, even C.V. Raman used to live there. Many of our great thinkers, Satyajit Ray. Now, who is today's Tagore? Who is today's Satyajit Ray? Even if they are people from Bengal who have done very well and have contributed to India's intellectual and cultural life, more often than not, they no longer live in Kolkata. So it's no point in telling me that, Shashi Tharoor is from Kolkata or Amartya Sen or whoever may be the person you're talking about. The fact is they don't live in Kolkata. And I think this is important. So there's been a declustering of Kolkata's intellectual heft. But the good news is I think it's easy to bring it back. And the reason for that is that there are some great institutions that are still in Kolkata. Kolkata still has India's best museum, the National Museum. It still has the Asiatic Society. It has the National Archives, all kinds of, things that can, if we invest in them, bring them back. And I would argue that these are relatively easily done, but somebody has to pay attention to it and do it. Now, the other point you were making, which is on the point I make that we need to build more Bostons, not Kanpurs. The point I'm making there is when we build universities, modern universities, post-independence, we have somehow thought of universities as being somewhat separate from the business of building the city. So when we build a university, we'll take 300 acres outside the city, put a wall around it, and it remains separated from the city, even if that city now expands and envelops it. So we have an awkward situation where, IIT Kanpur exists in Kanpur. It's one of our best institutions, but what does Kanpur benefit from its existence in the city? How does Kharagpur benefit from IIT Kharagpur? It doesn't, because we have walled it off and kept it completely separate. Now, imagine the opposite. Boston is all about Harvard and MIT and Boston University and many other institutions that are there. You cannot imagine Boston, its intellectual and economic ecosystem, without its universities thrown in. Think of London without thinking of LSE or LBS or many of the other institutions there. And, you can go on. New York without Columbia. So every great city has anchor intellectual institutions, particularly academic institutions. And this was how it used to be in ancient times in India. I mean, Ujjain was one of our great cities. It was also a great university. Nalanda was a great intellectual hub, not far from Patna. And it was a part of the ecosystem of ancient India. Even in colonial times, we built some great intellectual institutions. For example, St. Xavier's Kolkata or St. Xavier's Mumbai, Sydenham, Sriram College of Commerce, Lady Sriram. All these are great universities and intellectual institutions, but they are integrated as part of the city. Today, when we build them, you build IIT Delhi or JNU, they are universes unto themselves, not linked to the city. So the point I'm making is that we need to build new universities as part of the city. That has great benefit to the universities. It also has great benefit to the cities because it brings sort of the human capital cluster to the heart of the city.
For those of you who just tuned in, Sanjeev Sanyal, internationally acclaimed economist and best-selling author, is in studio, and In 2007, he was awarded the Eisenhower Fellowship for his work on urban dynamics. Also, visiting scholar at Oxford, a Junk Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies, Singapore, and a Senior Fellow of the Worldwide Fund for Nature. Now, I love that you give this inclusive picture of Singapore, which is true, which is the real inclusive picture of Singapore, and how they use the Formula One race to their infinite advantage, and how we got it all wrong in Delhi. So explain that.
So this is very important to understand that cities are evolving ecosystems which are sort of bringing in all kinds of things into it. If you begin to think any of the ingredients of a city as separate silos, then you'll completely miss the point about cities being ecosystems. So just as you said, let's look at how Singapore has thought about this Formula One issue. About a decade ago, both Delhi and Singapore decided to bring in Formula One racing as a part of sort of promoting tourism and so on. Now, Delhi thought of it as an engineering problem of trying to get cars to go as fast as possible. So if you're going to solve an engineering problem, they solved it by creating a dedicated racing track, the Budh racing track just outside Delhi. Now, Singapore, however, didn't think of it as an engineering problem of getting cars to go fast. They thought of it as a urban buzz issue. So what they said is that, it doesn't matter if the cars go very fast or don't go very fast. What really matters is, can you create a buzz? So they decided to have the Formula One in the middle of Singapore, running literally on the day-to-day roads. They improved those roads, closed them off over for one weekend, and basically had a big party. Now the cars run easily much faster on Budh circuit, but Singapore had the better party, and they decided to do this at night, and with helicopters going up and all of that, and it has been a super success. Now, meanwhile in Delhi, we did it for a couple of years, and it became too expensive, the overheads and so on. A huge amount of land got used up for this circuit, and of course the project failed. Now imagine the opposite, which is, we had this Formula One circuit in the middle of the city. Imagine fluorescent cars running down Rajpath and then going around Connaught Place, or if you did it in Mumbai, fluorescent cars at night driving at 300 kilometers per hour down Marine Drive for one weekend a year. Guess what? We wouldn't need Incredible India campaign. There are like literally millions of people watching this every year, and it pays for itself. So my view is, thinking of the city as an integrated system, whether it's terms of urban buzz, or I was talking earlier of universities, all these ingredients have to be put in the middle of the city and let to interact. That's what creates the urban cluster. Thinking of these things in silos misses the point completely.
Now, before we jump to economics, I'm going to just touch upon one other aspect of urban dynamics, only because I'm equally invested in Calcutta or Kolkata as I am in Mumbai. I schooled in La Martiniere for boys in Loudon Street, and I went to college in St. Xavier's here. So, and you just mentioned Xavier's. And when you were talking of Calcutta and talking about reigniting its spirit, you also mentioned the museum.
Yes.
And you devote a portion of the book saying Mumbai needs an iconic museum. And I'm going to allow you to explain that.
So I think Mumbai needs an iconic museum because, pardon me for saying this is a great city at multiple levels.
And no disrespect to the Prince of Wales Museum or the Chhatrapati Shivaji Vastu Sangrahalaya.
Yeah, but let's face it, the British built it. We are now 70 years after independence. What have we contributed to the cause? The British built part of the city is now actually a very small part of the city. The city has expanded well past where it was. And if you look at the cultural and social institutions of this city, we are still functioning on whatever was left behind by our forefathers or by colonial rulers. Where are the new theatres, museums, or even temples for that matter? Whereas we should, why aren't we building more Siddhi Vinayak temples? Why are we still, relying on whether it's in Kolkata, the Victoria Memorial, or it's the Victoria Terminus? We may have renamed it. How long are we going to keep celebrating, Queen Victoria? So we need to build things of our times. And one example I gave was, Mumbai is all about the sea. And it's just not colonially, right? It has a very long history going back to ancient times. So if there is one place in the country where we need to have a good maritime museum, it would be Mumbai. You can decide where you want to do it. Maybe some of the old port trust land can be redeployed to it. It doesn't need a huge amount of land, by the way. But, let's maybe take some of the defunct Indian Navy destroyer and put it there, get some large ships, and basically create buzz. In great cities are also interesting cities. And, how long are we going to rely on museums left behind by former colonial powers?
Fair enough. Sanjeev Sanyal's India in the Age of Ideas, Select Writings 2006 to 2018, with a foreword by Bibek Debroy, Chairman of Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister. Is on all on-ground as well as online stores. An opportunity now for you to win yourself a book. We're giving away 5 books on the show. Name one other book by Sanjeev Sanyal. I'm not allowed to say India at the Age of Ideas, but any other book that he has written. Pop the name of the book along with your name on our WhatsApp line 99677433943. Easy way to remember it. The last 3 digits are our frequency 943. So you go 99677433943. The name of the book along with your name. On Twitter and Facebook, you go to the search bar, type HRISHIKAY. I'll pop up. Tweet out with your name. Post on the timeline inbox on Facebook with your name. And finally, facebook.com/radio1.mum, our official page. Sanjeev Sanyal, a book by him, not India in the Age of Ideas, but any previous book. Please pop that on the timeline or inbox along with your name and you're good to go. Let's move on to economics. Now, for those of you who are voracious readers, I haven't really touched upon in this particular interview the first section of Sanjeev's book, which is history and culture, because then that would take many, many hours. But I highly advocate you go and read the history and culture bit. I'm going to bring a little bit of that in, because in the economics section, you say, or you argue why India needs to no longer be an Ashokan republic, but a Chanakyan one. Explain.
So we are an ancient civilization, and as you can imagine, we have had many political debates over the millennia. Now, one of the great ancient debates, so to speak, the way I like to position it, is thinking about what the Indian state should do. And in ancient times, there was, in a sense, a debate between 2 different visions. There was a Kautilyan or Chanakyan view, which comes through in the Arthashastra, which is the idea of a strong but limited state. So Chanakya was, of course, very much in favor of a very strong state, a state that he brokered no nonsense on things of national security, defense, internal security, and so on. But on the other hand, he was very, very clear also about limiting the state, because he was extremely suspicious of government officials. He keeps making the point that government officials, given too much power, become corrupt and so on. So he had this whole advocacy of a strong but limited state. Now, 2 generations later, you have Ashoka. He is very much an advocate of a weak but all-pervasive state. So if he presents himself as being, I am the father to my people. If you read his edicts, he goes on about how he is going to institute dharma mahamantas who will look after the people, just like a baby is looked after by a nurse. So I shall put these. Now, my own view is that's a hugely interventionist way of thinking. I mean, dharma mahamanta is what? It's a religious police. My own view is here is a man who really wants to interfere with your life, and his image of being this pacifist and benign person is actually not our traditional view of Ashoka. This is actually a creation of the late 19th century, early 20th century view of Ashoka. In fact, his traditional image in Indian writings is largely that of being quite a incompetent and evil king, Chand Ashoka. So the point I'm making here is there was these 2 views of the Indian state historically. At the time of independence, Nehru decided that he would adopt Ashoka for his own socialist project. And so he then used Ashoka as a way of creating the Nehruvian state, which is, of course, a very all-pervasive but weak state. No prizes for guessing. I belong to a different preference. I prefer a much stronger state, but also remember a limited state, a state that doesn't go and do too many things, but the things it does, it has no sense of humor about.
Now, moving from India to an outward vision, there's a lot of that in the book. In particular, Trumponomics 101, decoding Donald Trump's economic vision. Well, since we have to look outward, let's look there. Explain that. Handhold us through that.
So, one of the things about this book is I have written this over many years, and I deliberately did not update the articles. Irrespective of what you think about the issue today, I wanted people to think about the issue as it happens. And the reason I did this is because, quite apart from the specific issue of Trump or Brexit or many other things, I think it is my view of history. And my view of history is that history doesn't run along some fixed rail. It is all about unintended consequences, going off in butterfly effects and going off into a direction nobody had predicted. Nobody had predicted Trump, for example. So if you see many of those articles, the thing that I'm trying to get people to understand through them is not necessarily my specific view of what Trump was going to do, but try to give you a taste of what we were thinking he was going to go to do. This gives you a feel of the contingent nature of history, that once you go down a certain path, no matter how unlikely it was ex ante, once you've taken that path, that is the path you're going down. And so much of history is about this. And so if you see the book, there's an underlying philosophy of the book, which is complexity theory, which is all about this randomness of the paths we take. It's about butterfly effects, as I said, unintended consequences, and the truly non-deterministic view of how things turn out to be. And I contrast it with other philosophical views. I mean, for example, the Marxists, who have a very deterministic view of history. This, you will go through stage 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you will end up at some end point. And there are other philosophies who have that kind of approach. But I have this particular approach called complexity theory, which is a derivative of chaos theory, and
which is what you in a way you call CAS,
yes.
Isn't it? CAS.
Yes,
yeah.
Which is complex adaptive systems. And by the way, all the stuff I have in my book, whether it's my economics, my point I'm making about cities or culture, all of it is derived from this line of thinking that, look, flexibility always beats great planning.
Totally. The rise of tomorrow's middle class. I think that's one thing I would like to end this conversation with, wonderful as it has been. So,
I think, we are witnessing one of those great moments in history where you are seeing social and economic churn at an unprecedented level. I think it would not be wrong for me to say that there are very few places in the world currently which are seeing this amount of social and economic churn. And one of that is, of course, urbanization. And the other is, and related is, the rise of a completely new middle class. This is emerging, replacing in many ways the old middle class from which I and presumably you derive from. And this is first generation middle class. Their parents were perhaps the first generation that had some education. Their grandparents, perhaps, who are still alive, may well have been illiterate farmers. And so through this process, you are seeing the creation of a new India. And you can see that everywhere you look. I mean, look at the Indian cricket team, for example. There was a time when it was all about the Nawabs and so on. And then it was middle class. And now most of this cricket team is made up of completely first generation middle class. And this first generation middle class is impacting everything. I mean, good or bad, it's up to you to judge. But, it's affecting politics, it's affecting cultural life. The old middle class very often likes to say, in the good old days, 50 years ago, the film lyrics used to be so beautiful. The lyrics of our, songs, Sheila Ki Jawani, etc., are not quite up to the speed. So, effectively, what they're saying is that the cultural contours that they were used to is being challenged by this much more, what would I say, vernacular approach. And I think it's a good thing, because in that approach, this is also bringing new energy to this new India.
Okay, now I'm going to break away from the book now and ask you some other questions. You are currently a member of the committee tasked with writing a new national urban policy for the country. What is going to be the focus as far as that is concerned?
So, as I mentioned right in the beginning, we have had for the last 2 generations, since the 50s, a particular approach which is derived very much from a Corbusierian approach to city building. And I'm trying to break away from that. We have had a couple of national urban policy documents in the past, but the last one was in the 80s. But by and large, they stuck to that same template. This new policy, by the way, there is a draft of it which is online, and you can search it up, and even we are looking for comments on it. But the key point here that we are trying to do through this national urban policy is to break away from this Cartesian, Corbusierian, very mechanical view of a city to one that is much more organic. And so we are much more interested in localization, for example. We want decisions not coming from some planning commission in Delhi who decides how cities in India across the country should be. We much more want localized, local architecture, local solutions, devolution of powers, and so on. So that is one very important part of it. Secondly, an important part of it is stop thinking of cities in master plans. We have come to a point where we have master planned ourselves because we all think, oh, if only we had that perfect master plan, it would evolve it. So my approach is, look, this whole master plan approach is at best a business plan. And like anybody who runs a business knows, business plan is just a starting point. Stop taking it too seriously. We are making these massive interventions in cities as we speak. Building, metro in Mumbai, and the coastal road that will completely change the dynamics. Now we can't now have zoning based on the earlier architecture. You have to allow this new situation to impact the city, and you have to allow for it. And so I am a big votary for an evolutionary view to cities, and a much more organic view of cities. So we discussed earlier about a much more mix and match. I like messy cities. This business of having neat cities, neatness.
It's too Chandigarh.
It's too Chandigarh. You see, we need to invest in cleaning garbage.
Yeah,
Neatness should be about Swachh Bharat. Neatness should not be about making straight, linear, zoned cities. So, unfortunately, if you fly over Indian cities, you will find that they actually look very organized from the flight. Especially Delhi or Chandigarh look perfectly organized from the flight. When you land on the ground, it's all chaotic. We need to reverse it. It can look completely chaotic from above, but it's on the ground, the management on the ground that really matters. That's what this new urban policy framework is trying to do, with localized solutions, organic solutions, and of course we would love to have your comments.
Yeah, which you've actually preempted my next question, which is your reading of the Mumbai Coastal Road, and what do you think of it? Because the jury is out on that one. Lots of citizens are for it, and there is a sufficient voice that is coming out there saying, what are we doing with this? So your thoughts?
My view is every city has to evolve. Now, whether this specific intervention is the one you want, I am not in a position to comment, because, as I said, I believe in localized debate on this. Presumably, a democratically elected government has opted for it, so it did its consultations and so on. But now that we are going to do that, we need to adapt to this new situation rather than say, oh, if only we had done something else. This project is now on. Same thing is true of the Mumbai Metro. There were people opposing to that as well. But my view is that a city of Mumbai's scale and size cannot keep functioning with, those two 19th century lines that the British happen to have left behind. We have got to invest in new things. And when we do that, it will cause disruptions. There's no choice. Every city in the world goes through this disruptive process. It's so my worldview, as I said, is derived from complexity theory, and it allows for continuous evolution, adaptation, and all of it is disruptive.
Yeah. Also, because we're going to give away the answer to our contest and give away 5 books of India in the Age of Ideas. Just a look back, a cursory look back at Land of the Seven Rivers, Life Over 2 Beers, and The Ocean of Churn, your previous work in terms of writing. Just handhold us through that so that, if people who are sufficiently impressed by this conversation, I'm sure they are, go back and look at your anthology and pick them up.
So I am writer by accident, which is perfectly fits my philosophy because I am all about change and evolution. My very first book, which was called The Indian Renaissance, is mostly a book about Indian economy and how after 1991 things went through massive change. It was written a decade ago, so it's a little outdated, but I think the general idea will be still valid. Then there is a bunch of history books, Land of Seven Rivers, which is a geographical history of India. And then there is a history of India, or rather the Indian Ocean, which is called The Ocean of Churn. The reason I decided to write them is because for some reason the narrative of Indian history has been captured essentially by a landlocked view of Delhi, which is why all of us learn obscure dynasties who happen to rule Delhi, but we learn nothing about the Cholas, the Chalukyas, the Pallavas, the great history of Odisha or of Bengal and all the coastal parts of India, and of course their interlinkages with the rest of the world. From Indonesia to Oman. So one of the things I try to do is to provide a different view of history through these books. There is, of course, I have written one book of fiction as well, which is called Life Over Two Beers. It's a satirical take on modern India. So it's a series of short stories, and I try to satirize many things you see around you, from the life of a civil servant in Delhi, to the internal politics of a Mumbai housing society, which, as many of you will have experienced, is far more vicious than the politics in the Indian Parliament.
True that. How can people reach you? Are you on Twitter, on social networking? Fans of your writing, how can they reach out to you?
Yes, I am on social media, on Twitter and on Facebook. I am not perhaps as active as many people, but I'm not inactive either. I do post, once or twice a day, and people do get in touch through those mediums.
This has been an absolute pleasure. I look forward to seeing you very soon. Thank you, Sanjeev Sanyal.
Thank you so much.